Have you ever heard of a place that just ceased to exist? I'm not talking about a town that slowly faded away as people moved out. I'm talking about places that were once vibrant and alive, filled with people. And then one day, they were gone. Swallowed by the earth, or the sea, or maybe by something far more sinister. These are the world's lost locations, places shrouded in a thick fog of mystery and darkness, where the stories left behind are often more terrifying than any ghost story you've ever heard. These are the places that haunt our maps and our history books, leaving behind nothing but chilling questions and a profound sense of unease. Today, we're going to be exploring an iceberg of these very locations. We'll start at the surface with a name you've almost certainly heard before, a legend that has captivated imaginations for centuries. But as we go deeper, the stories will get stranger, more obscure, and frankly, much more disturbing. Each layer of this iceberg will take us further into the shadows, uncovering tales of sudden disappearances, cryptic clues, and events so bizarre they defy all logical explanation. These are the stories that keep historians up at night, the puzzles that have never been solved. So if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, you're in the right place. I invite you to come along with me as we descend into this abyss of the unknown. We're going to see just how deep this iceberg goes, and I promise you by the time we reach the bottom you'll be looking at the world a little differently. Before we begin, I'd really appreciate it if you would gently press the like button. It's the #1 way to help the channel out, and I really do appreciate it. Now let's get started. We begin our descent at the very tip of the iceberg, with a name that is practically synonymous with the term Lost City, Atlantis. For thousands of years, this story, first told by the Greek philosopher Plato, has echoed through history. He described a utopian island civilization, a naval power of immense wealth and advanced knowledge, located somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The people of Atlantis were said to be noble and powerful, living in a city of concentric rings of water and land adorned with exotic metals and intricate architecture. It was, by all accounts, a paradise on earth, a testament to human achievement. But their perfection, as the story goes, was their downfall. Over time, the divine nature of the Atlanteans became diluted. They grew greedy, corrupt, and filled with hubris. They began to wage wars of conquest against their neighbors, seeking to dominate the known world. This arrogance angered the gods, particularly Zeus, who saw their moral decay as an affront to the divine order. He convened with the other gods, and together they decided that this once great civilization had to be punished, wiped clean from the face of the planet as a warning to all of humanity. So in a single terrifying day and night of violent earthquakes and catastrophic floods, the island of Atlantis was consumed by the sea. The ground shook so violently that buildings crumbled into dust, and the ocean rose up in a furious, unstoppable wave, swallowing the entire island whole. It vanished without a trace, taking all its people, its incredible technology, and its immense wealth down into the silent, crushing depths. And just like that, the most advanced civilization the world had ever known was gone, leaving behind only Plato's cautionary tale. Now, for centuries, most people believe this was just an allegory, a story Plato made up to illustrate his philosophical points about power and corruption, a myth. But what if it wasn't? This is where the story takes a turn from philosophy to a chilling mystery. Explorers, historians, and conspiracy theorists have spent their entire lives searching for this sunken kingdom. They've pored over ancient texts and sonar scans of the ocean floor, desperately looking for any sign, any proof that Atlantis was real. The search has become an obsession for many, and the theories about where it might be are all over the map, literally. Some believe it was the island of Santorini, which was devastated by a massive volcanic eruption around 1600 BC, an event that certainly could have been described as the wrath of the gods. Others point to the Bahamas, citing strange underwater rock formations like the Bimini Road as potential remnants of Atlantean structures. Some even place it in Antarctica, suggesting the continent was once ice-free and home to this advanced society before a sudden pole shift flash froze it. But the more disturbing theories aren't about where it went, but why. Some fringe researchers suggest that the Atlanteans didn't just have advanced architecture, they had technology far beyond our own, perhaps even extraterrestrial in origin. They believe the gods who destroyed them weren't mythological beings, but a rival alien faction, or that the Atlanteans' own technological hubris led to a cataclysmic accident, a sort of prehistoric nuclear meltdown that sank their continent. Imagine a civilization so advanced that their downfall was not a simple earthquake, but an event of their own making, a power they couldn't control. What if the story isn't a warning about moral decay, but a warning about technological ambition? The thought that an entire civilization could be so utterly erased from existence, whether by nature, the gods, or their own hands, is a profoundly unsettling idea. It suggests that no matter how powerful we become, we could also vanish in a single day and night. The silence from the ocean depths is deafening. For over 2,000 years Atlantis has remained lost, its secrets guarded by the crushing pressure and the darkness of the abyss. Is it a myth, a sunken reality, or something else entirely? Its position at the top of our iceberg is secure because of its fame, but the chilling possibilities of its true nature are what allows us to begin our descent into the strange, dark, and mysterious. As we sink just below the surface, we encounter a story that feels much more intimate and therefore much more terrifying. This isn't a quasi-mythological empire. This is a group of real people, men, women, and children, who traveled across an ocean for a new life, only to vanish from the face of the earth. I'm talking about the lost colony of Roanoke. In 1587, over 100 English settlers, led by Governor John White, established a colony on Roanoke Island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. It was a hopeful, yet perilous endeavor. Among these colonists was Governor White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, who gave birth to the first English child born in the Americas, a baby girl named Virginia Dare. It should have been a symbol of a bright future, a new beginning. But supplies were dangerously low, and relations with the local Native American tribes were tense and unpredictable. Realizing they wouldn't survive the winter without aid, the colonists persuaded a reluctant John White to sail back to England to gather more provisions and reinforcements. He promised he would return as quickly as possible. He left his family, his daughter and his brand new granddaughter, and the entire colony behind and set sail. But his return was catastrophically delayed. When he arrived in England, he found the country on the brink of war with Spain. The Spanish Armada was preparing to attack, and every available ship was commandeered for the war effort, including his own. For 3 long, agonizing years, John White was trapped in England, haunted by the thought of his colony, of his family, waiting for him across the vast, unforgiving Atlantic. Finally, in August of 1590, 3 years after he left, John White was able to secure passage back to Roanoke. As his ship approached the island, he noted a plume of smoke rising from the woods, a sign he hoped meant the colonists were still there, waiting. But as he and his men landed and walked towards the settlement, a dreadful silence greeted them. There were no lookouts, no welcoming party. The site where the bustling colony once stood was completely deserted. The houses and fortifications had been carefully dismantled, not violently torn down. There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, no skeletons, nothing to suggest a battle or a plague. It was as if over 100 people had simply packed up their entire lives and vanished into thin air. All of their heavy equipment, like cannons and boats, was gone. It was a ghost town, meticulously erased. The only clues left behind were 2 cryptic carvings. On a fence post, someone had carved the single word, Croatoan, and on a separate tree, just the letters, CRO. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and it was also the name of the friendly Native American tribe that inhabited it. Before he left, John White had instructed the colonists that if they had to move, they should carve their destination into a tree. He also told them that if they were in distress or forced to leave, they should carve a Maltese cross above the name, but there was no cross. This suggested that they had left willingly, peacefully relocating to Croatoan Island. This seemed like the most logical explanation, so why is it a mystery? Because John White was never able to go to Croatoan Island. A powerful storm blew in, what we'd now call a hurricane, making any attempt to sail south to the island impossible. With his supplies dwindling and his crew near mutiny, a heartbroken John White was forced to abandon the search and return to England. He died years later, never knowing the fate of his daughter, his granddaughter Virginia, or the colonists of Roanoke. And no one else ever found them either. Subsequent expeditions to Croatoan Island found no definitive trace of the colonists. Later accounts from Jamestown settlers told of rumors from native tribes about people with European features living among them, or of a tribe that could read English, or even a brutal story of the colonists being slaughtered. But none of these stories were ever confirmed. The colonists of Roanoke, including little Virginia Dare, were never seen or heard from again. They walked out of their settlement one day and straight into the pages of American folklore, leaving behind only one chilling, unexplained word: Croatoan. We now push deeper into the iceberg, into the frozen, unforgiving wilderness of Soviet Russia in the 1950s. Here, the mystery isn't about a lost city or a vanished colony, but about a specific horrifying event that left behind 9 bodies and a set of circumstances so bizarre, so utterly baffling, that over 60 years later investigators are no closer to a real answer. This is the infamous and deeply disturbing story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. In February 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers, all students or graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, failed to report back from a skiing expedition in the northern Ural Mountains. The leader of the group was Igor Dyatlov, and they were all seasoned veterans of wilderness treks. They were skilled, prepared, and knew the risks. When they didn't arrive at their destination and a week passed with no word, a search party was sent out to find them. On February 26th, the search team discovered the group's abandoned tent on the slopes of a mountain known as Kholat Syakhl, which in the local Mansi language translates to Dead Mountain. And what they found at this tent was the beginning of a truly nightmarish puzzle. The tent had been sliced open from the inside, not unzipped, not untied, but violently cut open with a knife, as if the occupants were in a desperate, frantic hurry to escape whatever was inside the tent with them. The hikers' belongings, including their shoes, warm clothes, and supplies, were all left behind, neatly arranged. In the snow outside, the searchers found a trail of footprints, made by people who were either barefoot, wearing only socks, or a single shoe, heading away from the relative safety of the tent and down the slope towards a dense forest. This made absolutely no sense. The temperature that night was estimated to be as low as -30 degrees Celsius, or -22 Fahrenheit. To run out into that kind of lethal cold without proper clothing or footwear is not just illogical, it's a death sentence. Why would 9 experienced hikers do this? What could have possibly terrified them so much that they would choose a certain freezing death over staying inside their tent for one more second? The footprints showed no sign of a struggle, no evidence of anyone else being there, just the 9 hikers fleeing in panic. About a mile away, at the edge of the forest under a large cedar tree, the searchers found the first 2 bodies. They belonged to Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were stripped down to their underwear and were barefoot. Next to them were the remains of a small, hastily made fire. The branches on the cedar tree above them were broken up to a height of 5 meters, suggesting one of them had frantically tried to climb it, perhaps to get a better view of something, or maybe to escape something on the ground. Between the cedar tree and the camp, the searchers found 3 more bodies, including that of the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov. They were found in poses that suggested they were trying to crawl back to the tent, a desperate final attempt to reach safety before they succumbed to hypothermia. These first 5 deaths, while strange, were officially attributed to the cold, but the real horror was yet to come. It took another 2 months before the remaining 4 hikers were found, buried under more than 10 feet of snow in a ravine deeper in the woods. And these bodies told a very different and much more violent story. One hiker, Nicholas Thibault Brignol, had suffered a massive skull fracture. 2 others, Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov, had major chest fractures, the kind of damage a medical examiner said was equivalent to the force of a high-speed car crash. And yet, there were no external wounds, no soft tissue damage. It was as if they had been crushed by an immense invisible force. And perhaps most gruesomely, Lyudmila was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. The final official verdict was that the hikers died from a compelling natural force. But what force cuts a tent open from the inside? What force causes experienced hikers to run barefoot into a blizzard? And what natural force can crush human chests without leaving a single bruise? Theories have ranged from an avalanche, which doesn't explain the lack of external trauma or the cut tent, to an attack by the local Mansi people, who were peaceful and whose involvement was ruled out, to secret Soviet weapons testing, an infrasound-induced panic, or even an encounter with a Yeti or a UFO. The file was closed, the deaths remain unexplained, and the slopes of Dead Mountain keep their terrifying secrets. We're now sinking deeper into the warm, tropical waters of the Strait of Malacca. Our next lost location isn't a place on a map, but a vessel that became a floating tomb, a ghost ship with a story so chilling it sounds like something straight out of a horror novel. But, according to legend, it's a true story. This is the tale of the Dutch freighter, the SS Orang Medan. The name itself is Indonesian for man from Medan, and the mystery begins sometime in the late 1940s, though the exact date is disputed, adding to the legend's murky nature. The story goes that multiple ships sailing the busy trade routes of the Strait of Malacca picked up a terrifyingly frantic SOS message. The Morse code transmission was erratic, but the words were clear. The sender identified himself as a crew member of the SS Orang Medan. The message began, "SOS from Orang Medan. We float. All officers including captain are dead, lying in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole crew dead. This alone would be enough to send a shiver down any sailor's spine. A ship full of dead men, adrift at sea." But the message wasn't over. After a brief, garbled pause filled with what sounded like frantic, indecipherable code, a final, chilling message came through. Just 2 words, clear as a bell, before the line went completely silent. "I die." That was it. The radio went dead. Nearby merchant ships and listening posts tried to hail the Orang Medan, but there was no response. Using triangulation, they were able to get a rough fix on the ship's position, and the closest vessel, an American merchant ship called the Silver Star, diverted its course to render aid, its crew bracing for whatever horror they might find. After several hours of sailing, the crew of the Silver Star spotted it. The Orang Medan, floating silently on the calm sea, seemingly undamaged. As they drew closer, they hailed it with their horn and radio, but received no reply. The ship was eerily quiet. A boarding party was assembled, and they motored over to the silent freighter, climbing aboard with a growing sense of dread. What they found was a scene of absolute unimaginable horror, a tableau of death that defied all explanation. The message had been true. The entire crew of the Orang Medan was dead. They were scattered all over the ship, on the bridge, in the chart room, in the boiler room. Every single person was frozen in a state of sheer terror. Their bodies were found on their backs, their faces twisted upwards towards the sun, with their arms outstretched as if fending off some unseen attacker. Their mouths were wide open in a silent scream, and their eyes were wide with a look of pure, undiluted horror. Even the ship's dog, a small terrier, was found dead, snarling at something that wasn't there. What was so bizarre, so unsettling, was that the bodies themselves were completely unharmed. There were no signs of injury, no wounds, no evidence of violence or foul play. It was as if they had literally been scared to death. The boarding party, thoroughly unnerved, made a quick search of the ship. They noted an extreme unnatural chill in the air, especially deep in the cargo hold, despite the sweltering tropical heat on deck. It felt wrong. The captain of the Silver Star decided the best course of action was to tow the ghost ship to a nearby port for a proper investigation. They attached a tow line and began the slow process of pulling the Orang Medan. But they hadn't gotten far before the situation went from horrific to catastrophic. Smoke began to pour from the lower decks of the freighter, specifically from the number 4 cargo hold. The boarding party had just enough time to cut the tow line and scramble back to the safety of their own ship before the Orang Medan was rocked by a massive explosion. The blast was so powerful it lifted the ship out of the water before it broke apart and sank beneath the waves. The Orang Medan, and all the evidence of what happened to its crew, vanished forever into the depths of the ocean. With no ship and no bodies, a formal investigation was impossible. What killed the crew? The leading theory suggests the ship was illegally transporting a deadly unregistered chemical cargo. Perhaps something like potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin, which leaked and released a toxic gas that asphyxiated the crew before the volatile mixture exploded. But that doesn't fully explain their terrified expressions, or the final "I die" message. Other, darker theories whisper of pirates, carbon monoxide poisoning, or even a paranormal or extraterrestrial attack, a force so terrifying it could stop a man's heart with fear alone. The ship is gone, but its legend remains, a testament to a silent collective scream that still echoes across the sea. We are now entering the darker, more personal depths of the iceberg. This isn't about a ship or a colony, it's about a family. It's about a single night, a single house, and 5 children who seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind a mystery that has tormented their surviving family members for over 75 years. This is the heartbreaking and deeply strange case of the Sodder children. It all began on Christmas Eve, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sauter family, George, Jenny, and 9 of their 10 children, were at home, celebrating the holiday. An older son, John, was spending the night with his older brother, Joe, who was away serving in the military. So inside the 2-story timber house were George, Jenny, and the 9 other children. 4 of the older kids, Marion, George Jr., Martha, and Jenny Jr., were allowed to stay up late playing with the new toys Marion had bought them. The 5 youngest, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, went up to their attic bedrooms to sleep. Around 12:30 a.m., Jenny Sauter was woken up by the phone ringing. When she answered, it was a woman asking for a name she didn't recognize. Jenny told the woman she had the wrong number and hung up, noticing on her way back to bed that the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked, which was unusual. She saw her daughter Marion asleep on the living room couch and assumed the other kids who had been up late had gone back up to the attic. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and went back to sleep. Just an hour later at 1:30 a.m. she was woken again, this time by the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. George, Jenny, Marion, and 2 of their sons, John and George Jr., who were sleeping downstairs, managed to escape the rapidly spreading blaze. But the 5 youngest children were still trapped upstairs in the attic. The house was quickly becoming an inferno. Panic set in. George Sauter rushed to get his heavy-duty ladder, which he always kept propped against the side of the house so he could climb up to the attic window. But the ladder was gone. It wasn't just knocked over, it was missing from the property entirely. His next desperate idea was to drive one of his 2 large coal trucks up to the house and climb on top of it to reach the window. But when he tried to start them, neither of the trucks would turn over. They had been working perfectly the day before. The family could only watch in horror as their home burned to the ground, helpless to save the 5 children trapped inside. The fire department, plagued by its own strange set of problems, didn't arrive until 8 a.m., by which point the house was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash in a flooded basement. The assumption was tragic but simple. The 5 children had perished in the fire. But when the fire chief and his men sifted through the debris, they found no bones, no remains of any kind. The chief suggested the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies, but Jenny Sauter, who had worked in a crematorium, knew that even the most intense fires leave behind bone fragments. A house fire, even a hot one, shouldn't have been able to completely obliterate 5 skeletons. This is where the doubt began to creep in, and the strange events of that night started to look less like coincidences and more like a coordinated plot. The mysterious phone call, the missing ladder, the sabotaged trucks, the lack of remains. The Sauters began to believe their children weren't dead, but had been kidnapped, and the fire was set as a diversion. George Sauter was an Italian immigrant who was outspokenly critical of Mussolini, and he had been the target of threats from the local Italian mafia. Had they made good on their threats? Over the years, the Sauters pursued every possible lead. They hired a private investigator who discovered that the fire chief had found a human heart in the ashes, which he had secretly buried in a box. When they had the box exhumed, the heart turned out to be beef liver, and it hadn't even been touched by the fire. Why would the fire chief lie and plant evidence? Was he part of a cover-up? The family put up a large billboard on Route 16 with pictures of the 5 missing children, offering a substantial reward for any information. The billboard stood for over 30 years, a haunting monument to a family's undying hope and a community's dark secret. They received thousands of tips, but none led to anything concrete. The most tantalizing and heartbreaking clue came in 1967, 22 years after the fire. Jenny Sauter received a letter in the mail, postmarked from Kentucky, with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his late 20s who bore a striking resemblance to her son Louis, who would have been around that age. On the back of the photo was a cryptic handwritten note. The Sauters hired another private investigator to look into it, but he took their money and disappeared. The family never saw or heard from him again. George and Jenny Sauter went to their graves believing their children were still alive somewhere, stolen from them in the middle of a fiery Christmas night. We are now deep beneath the waves of the iceberg, in a place of profound isolation and psychological dread. Our next location is a remote, uninhabited rock in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, a place battered by the relentless fury of the North Atlantic. On this rock, known as Eileen Moor, stands a lighthouse. And in December of 1900, this lighthouse became the stage for one of the most baffling and enduring maritime mysteries of all time. This is the story of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse and its 3 vanished keepers. The lighthouse was manned by a rotation of 4 keepers. 3 would be on the island for a 6-week shift, while 1 remained on the mainland for 2 weeks of shore leave. In December of 1900, the 3 men on duty were Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur. They were experienced, professional, and knew the solitary life of a keeper well. The 4th man, Joseph Moore, was on shore leave, waiting to relieve one of them after Christmas. The mystery began on December 15th. A passing steamer, the Arctur, noted in its log that the Flannan Isles light was not lit, a serious breach of protocol in one of the most treacherous shipping lanes in the region. But for some reason, the captain didn't report it when he docked. It wasn't until the official relief vessel, the Hesperus, arrived on December 26th, delayed by severe storms, that the alarm was truly raised. As the Hesperus approached Eileen Moore, the crew was immediately struck by a sense of wrongness. There was no flag flying on the flagpole. None of the keepers were there to greet them at the landing stage. The provision boxes had not been put out to be restocked. The ship's captain blew the horn and fired a flare, but the lighthouse remained silent and still. A deeply unnerved Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, was rowed ashore to investigate. What he found only deepened the mystery. The main door to the lighthouse was unlocked. As he stepped inside, the first thing he saw was that the kitchen clock had stopped. In the kitchen, a meal of salted mutton and potatoes sat on the table, untouched, as if the men had been called away in the middle of preparing it. One of the chairs was overturned, suggesting a sudden departure. Moore continued his search. He found that 2 of the 3 oilskin coats, the heavy-duty waterproof gear essential for going outside in the Atlantic weather, were missing. 1 coat was left behind on its peg. This implied that 2 of the men had gone outside, but 1 had remained inside. But why? And where were they? Moore, now terrified, ran back to the boat to get help. 2 other sailors returned with him, and they conducted a more thorough search of the lighthouse. The keepers' beds were unmade and the logbook was open on the desk. The entries in the log were methodical and routine until December 12th. On that day, the principal keeper, Thomas Marshall, wrote of a severe storm, the likes of which he had never seen in 20 years. He wrote that the wind was so strong and the waves so high that the men had been praying. He also noted that James Duckett, a normally stoic man, had been very quiet, and that Donald MacArthur, a tough, seasoned sailor, had been crying. This was extremely unusual. The lighthouse stands over 150 feet above sea level. For waves to be so high that they would frighten 3 experienced keepers inside the structure was almost unbelievable. The log entries continued for the next 2 days, noting the storm was still raging and the men were still praying. The final entry on December 15th was brief and strange. It simply said, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." And then, nothing. The men had vanished. A search of the island revealed more disturbing clues. The landing stage on the west side of the island was heavily damaged by the storm. A supply crate that had been secured in a crevice 110 feet above sea level had been smashed open and its contents strewn about. A set of iron railings had been bent and twisted out of shape. The official explanation concluded that the storm had subsided and 2 of the men, Duckett and Marshall, went down to the landing to secure the equipment. MacArthur, the one without the coat, then saw a massive freak rogue wave about to crash over them and ran out to warn them, but all 3 were swept out to sea. But this theory is full of holes. Why would they go out before the storm was truly over? Why would MacArthur run out without his coat? And why was the kitchen table set for a meal that was never eaten? The mystery of Eileen Moore has spawned countless darker theories: a fight among the men, a foreign vessel kidnapping them, or even something supernatural, a creature from the sea itself that came ashore and took them. The lighthouse is automated now, but the ghosts of the 3 keepers, and the questions surrounding their disappearance, still haunt that lonely rock at the edge of the world. We have now reached the final, deepest, and perhaps most visually disturbing layer of our iceberg. We travel high into the Himalayas, to a remote, glacial lake in the Indian state of Uttarakhand, situated at an altitude of over 16,000 feet. For most of the year, this lake is frozen solid, its secrets locked away beneath a sheet of ice. But for 1 month each year when the ice melts, it reveals a truly gruesome and baffling sight. This is Rupkund Lake, known to the world as Skeleton Lake. The story of its discovery in the modern era is almost as chilling as the lake itself. In 1942, a British forest ranger named H.K. Madwal was patrolling this remote, uninhabited region when he stumbled upon the lake during its brief annual thaw. He looked into the crystal-clear, shallow water and was met with a sight that must have frozen his blood. At the bottom of the lake, and scattered around its edges, were hundreds upon hundreds of human skeletons. It was a mass grave in one of the most inaccessible places on Earth. Initial thoughts were that these were the remains of Japanese soldiers who had died from exposure while trying to sneak through India as part of a World War II invasion. The British government, fearing a Japanese military secret, sent a team to investigate. But, upon examination, they quickly realized the bones were not recent. They were ancient, far too old to be from the war. This only deepened the mystery. Who were these people? And how did they all die together in this one remote spot? For decades, the prevailing theory was that this was a single group of people, perhaps a king and his entourage or a large group of pilgrims, who were caught in a sudden, violent blizzard or avalanche sometime in the 9th century. Local legends told the story of a king who angered a local mountain goddess, Nanda Devi, who then unleashed a furious hailstorm upon his party, killing them all with iron balls from the sky. It was a fascinating story, but for a long time it was just that, a story. But when modern scientific analysis was finally conducted on the remains, the truth turned out to be both stranger and more horrifying, perfectly matching the ancient legend. Forensic studies of the skulls revealed that every single one of them had similar short, deep cracks in the back of their heads. The damage wasn't from a conventional weapon like a sword or an axe. The injuries were consistent with being struck from directly above by a large, round object, about the size of a cricket ball. The analysis of the skeletons also showed that there were no other injuries on any other part of their bodies. This ruled out an avalanche or a landslide, which would have caused crushing injuries all over. It also ruled out a battle. These people were all killed by blows to the head, and nothing else. The conclusion was as bizarre as it was terrifying. This large group of people had been caught out in the open with nowhere to hide during a freak, monstrously violent hailstorm. They were pelted to death by massive hailstones. But a 2019 genetic study threw another massive wrench into the works. Scientists analyzed the DNA from 38 of the skeletons and discovered something that completely upended the single event theory. The skeletons weren't from just one group of people from one time period. They belonged to at least 3 distinct genetic groups who had died in at least 2 separate events, separated by as much as 1,000 years. One group was of typical South Asian ancestry, dating to around the 9th century, fitting the original theory. But another, much more mysterious group, was genetically from the Eastern Mediterranean, people from Greece or Crete, and they died much more recently, sometime around the 18th or 19th century. How did a group of people from Greece end up dead in a remote Himalayan lake 1,000 years after the first group? And did they die in the same freakishly specific way? The lake offers no answers. It just holds its dead, a chilling, multi-layered graveyard of unrelated people from different continents and different centuries, all gathered together in death by some unknown repeating tragedy. It is a lost location in time, a place where history's victims are put on display, their silent bones asking a question we may never be able to answer. We've surfaced from the depths of the iceberg, but I have a feeling the chill from those lower levels is going to stick with us for a while. From the legendary sunken city of Atlantis to the horrifyingly real collection of bones in Skeleton Lake, these lost locations represent the edges of our understanding. They are the black holes in our history, places where the normal rules of life, and even death, seem to break down. Each story leaves us with more questions than answers, a lingering sense of unease that reminds us just how much of our world remains profoundly and terrifyingly unknown. These stories show us that people and even entire civilizations can be erased. Whether by the fury of nature, a strange twist of fate, or something far more sinister that we can't even comprehend, the world has a way of swallowing its secrets whole. The ghost ship, the vanished children, the keepers who walked out into a storm and never returned. These aren't just stories, they are permanent, unsolved wounds on the face of our collective history, and they serve as a stark reminder of our own fragility in a vast and often mysterious world. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these lost locations got under your skin the most? Was it the silent scream of the Orang Medan's crew, or the heartbreaking mystery of the Sodder Children's fire? Let me know in the comments below, and be warned, this is just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. There are other stories, other locations that are even deeper, even darker, and even more strange. If you want to see a part 2 exploring those, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for joining me on this descent into the strange, dark, and mysterious.